Hello and welcome to Business Daily. Here we bring you up to date with happenings in the world of business. I am Yusuf Akogu. A whole lot of issues happening in the world of business. We begin by serving you with a business roundup. Take a look.
The Nigerian Railway Corporation (NRC) says it generated 5.57 billion naira from passengers, cargoes, and other services in 2022. This figure represents a decrease of 7.69% to 464.74 million naira when compared to the revenue of 6.03 billion naira generated in 2021. The NRC data is contained in a report by the National Bureau of Statistics (NBS) on rail transportation for the third and fourth quarter of last year. According to the report, the corporation generated 4.54 billion naira from passengers in 2022 against 5.69 billion naira in 2021. In the year under review, goods and cargoes led to a revenue of 416.85 million naira relative to the 299.80 million naira in 2021, while income from other receipts stood at 607.80 million naira, 569.38 million naira higher than the 38.42 million naira recorded in 2021. The federal government has said it will go ahead with the concession plan for airports in the country. In continuation of their two-day warning strike on Tuesday, aviation unions blocked major roads in strategic places around Murtala Mohammed International Airport, Lagos. The unions laid siege to the Lagos International Airport, which led to heavy traffic on the roads leading to the airport. The unions insisted that 7 days after the end of the warning strike, they would totally shut down the Nigerian airspace. This is, as the Ministry of Aviation has said, conditions of services in some of the agencies is a work in progress.
That was business roundup there. A lot happening in the world of business there. Now we turn our attention to what is happening in the capital market. As usual, we start with, of course, the Nigerian capital market. And at the close of business on Tuesday, the market closed in the positive. Maybe some call it flat, but 0.03%. That is how the market closed yesterday. With the market capitalization stand at 27.9 trillion naira. The volume of shares that were traded yesterday about 1.03 trillion naira. That is about 56% improvement from what we had on Monday. That was massive. Then you look at the volume, the value, of course, of the traded shares, 3.56 billion naira. That is also a huge number. Then the deals, of course, 4,668. This is the number of equities that exchange hands between investors on the floor of the Nigerian capital market on Tuesday. Moving on to the gainers for Tuesday, of course, we have a Transcorp. Transcorp has remained, since the beginning of the week, they have been there among the gainers so far on the floor of the Nigerian stock market, doing 9.73% at the close of business. RT Briscoe is a Toyota company that their deals in Toyota. They are also up at here, plus 9.09%. And of course, International Energy Insurance up 7.50%. So these top three actually completed our top three gainers that we are watching for Tuesday. Then moving on to the losers on the floor, we have Vitafoam. Of course, we also all know Vitafoam. Vitafoam down 8.65%. Nikkei Assurance also down minus 8.33%. And of course, Sham PLC also down 8.00%. Then let's look at the top trade from Tuesday. Of course, Transcorp very, very visible on that list. They're topping the top trade, what we call market movers, about 814 million worth of shares that is contributed to the market on Tuesday. Of course, Living Trust Mortgage Bank, of course, doing 70 million worth of shares there traded on the floor. And of course, Fidelity Bank for 3 days running has featured on the top trade, or what we call market movers, doing 16 million worth of shares. Let's quickly look at the African market before we talk to our guest. Johannesburg Stock Exchange is actually down these figures are from yesterday's trading, down 1.06 percent. Of course, Joburg Index is one of the top stock markets in Africa. They're down there in Southern Africa. And of course, Nairobi Stock Exchange also closed positive yesterday, 0.26%. The index is very, very low, 109.50%. And of course, we go to BRVM. BRVM is actually a stock market that comprises of the French-speaking West African countries, the like of Togo and so many, and the rest of them are actually, is a conglomerate of that countries that actually form this BRVM capital markets in the West Africa sub-region. They are down there 0.41%. So these are what we are actually watching from Africa today. But let's quickly talk to Vincent Oshoma. Vincent Oshoma is a financial analyst and, of course, a stockbroker. He joins us via phone from Lagos. Good morning, Mr. Vincent.
Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. We are actually looking at what transpired on the floor of the Nigerian capital market yesterday. We saw the market close, what we call flat yesterday. What do you think was responsible for what we saw yesterday?
Yeah, it was good. You could say it's a flat performance because the market went for 2 basis points. It was good for the market because that means market snapped out of the losing streak from last week into the trading on Monday. Monday market lost 1.5%. So it's snapping out of that loss from last week and this week, good for the market. And I think it's as a result of people looking at cherry-picking opportunities in the market because we cannot really see the major stock gaining. So because there's still opportunity in the market, despite what is happening in the economy and also in the fiscal space, I think people still see opportunity in the market for especially for stocks that whose qualification dates are still ahead for recently declared earnings. And so people and stocks that have also have some bearish on people taking position in those stocks. And that's why we see a marginal gain from the market.
Okay, looking at the share of Transcorp seems to be attracting so much from investors. We see Transcorp, we see Fidelity Bank, and the likes of International Energy Insurance rather. Actually, taking attention from investors. What do you think these companies are actually doing to, to have that huge attention?
Yes, we have seen a lot of interest in Transcorp recently. The news came out that Mr. Femi Otedola has acquired about 5% of Transcorp, which makes him one of the major investors in Transcorp. And looking at his pedigree, his experience, his major businessman, billionaire in Nigeria, I think that's what has drawn a lot of persons into taking position. But why it has been on a full view, because that's what as Mr. said, has been gaining consistency from around 130-something cover and now it's cover. So it shows a lot of interest in companies. They have to do confidence about due to the recent acquisition. That's why I see that performance. And also affecting some companies that are doing it. For Fidelity, we have seen Fidelity recently they will do the private placement placing, which was a success. And people see that Fidelity have potential. So from the recent performance, we have seen them grow with the acquisition of BBN, Union Bank UK. They have a lot of things that they are doing and they're showing their performance. And that's why we are seeing people taking interest, taking position in that fund. And based on the recent private placement, that is the one comes to do more business and more acquisition going forward. I think that's what people are buying, looking at the future for the company.
Now, Mr. Vincent, before I let you go, I know it's too early in the day to start prediction. Do you think that the market will sustain the gain that you recorded yesterday?
The concern is currently there are so many issues that the market is grappling with. One is the fact that from the recent inflation figures show that inflation is still going up in Nigeria to 2.04%. And also that tells you we're looking at rate hike from the CBN and also the fiscal challenges. Because this time is supposed to be a good time for the market because we're looking at Q1. But because of the challenges that we are having that and also we are winding up the current administration, especially the new administration. So it's actually usually a flat moment for the market. When market have been trading cycles and having a bearish market. So I don't think that the performance yesterday, this month, that is not something that is really sustainable. After the beginning of cherry-picking opportunities in the market, we see the market will continue to grapple with this challenges until we see a new administration coming. And if the Q1 result, we see a surprise in Q1, but it's not expected. The crash crunch that was saw happening around Q1, the direct affect most companies and even the bank. So that's the issue that the market is grappling with, and investors will come to factor in those issues in taking their decision.
Vincent Oshoma, thank you very much for your time on Business Daily.
Thanks, Adam.
So we take a quick break. When we come back, we'll go into our discussion. Stay with us. Glad to have you back. Now we quickly turn our attention to our discussion for today. Today we are focusing on power sector, and have joining me in the studio the Chief Executive Officer, Tao Energy, Dr. Toby Oluwatola. He's also an energy analyst. Glad to have you on Business Daily this morning.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, a lot of talk about the decentralization of power sector. We've been talking about this for a very long time, taking
Yes.
power off the exclusive list. What is your immediate reaction to this?
So first thing, it's a move in the right direction, and it certainly unlocks now the opportunity for a little more private sector participation and a little more autonomy from the level of the states. That said, there are still challenges that need to be surmounted. So number one is that the major challenge really with Nigeria's power sector is not just generation, it's also transmission and distribution. But it's also the fact that we have pre-existing contracts with distribution companies that we need to work around if we're going to have these new state-driven projects come alive. And lastly, the states really need to figure out very clearly how they make that energy, how they use energy to drive development. And so that means that there needs to be holistic state level plans about how energy will drive development as opposed to just as a vanity good.
Yeah, talking about the states, there are a lot of concern about, states are not at the same level. We have richer states and of course poorer states. Do you think the states will be able to compete at the same level if, of course, we're able to achieve this?
I think first off, we've got to ask ourselves the sincere question whether or not we need 36 states in Nigeria. The existence of 36 states is a product, an artifact of a military dictatorship that started out from breaking us to 12 states and then on and on, in many cases just to satisfy friends and girlfriends and create political positions. So we've got to ask ourselves that if a state is not viable, should it continue to exist as a sovereign entity, as a federating unit in the polity? And those are tough questions that the new administration has to grapple with to make sure that we shouldn't have states that cannot fend for themselves.
Not having states that cannot fend for themselves is a big challenge. And then let's look at the issue of Nigerian power sector. Currently, we are generating about, let's say, 12,000 megawatt or thereabouts, but the transmission is just far less, 4,000. 3,500 at some points, and we've had this issue of grid collapse and on many occasions. So what do you think we should do at our level to be able to, even though we can't generate more, let's at least transmit what we have generated?
So you're right, and I think that the new constitutional amendment is going to help with that. There needs to still be regulations that will help activate that constitutional amendment that will need to be made by the National Electricity Regulatory Commission. But already existing regulations such as the mini-grid regulation, eligible customer regulation, and the interconnected mini-grid aspect of the mini-grid regulation already provide a framework. And there's also the franchising model that the regulator also now allows the discos to implement, that allows the discos to franchise certain parts of their distribution network to private actors to take over, generate, transmit. So what you might call gentailers in other markets. So there is this regulation really unlocks those opportunities, and it remains to be seen. Some states already, as of now, there are states like Lagos State, Kaduna State, Edo State that already from the existing laws had already started to do some of these things that we expect to happen. What I also expect to happen is that a lot of states will, like Nasarawa State, for example, is thinking about having agro-industrial zones, and then using locally generated power to power those agro-industrial zones, and then selling excess power that is left through the franchise model to the neighborhoods of that area. So I think that you can see with this new law, you really can, it really unlocks the potential for lots of innovation. However, like I said, the regulator still also needs to do some work in making sure that we have the appropriate regulatory framework, that we don't have, Shylocks coming into the market. We have the appropriate regulatory framework, tariffs are set correctly, and that there is clear, good competition between the discos, because you also have cases where discos want to charge exorbitant distribution use of system charges just to let people use the existing lines. The new businesses that come will have to build a lot of new lines, because part of the challenges we have with the current line, just let me make this one point, with the current transmission system is that we operate a radial transmission system, which allows very many single points of failure. So the new people that come in would have to really reimagine and start to build new lines. That may mean that electricity prices will go up for a little bit, but it would still be cheaper than your generator.
To what extent do you think the privatization contributed to this?
Contributed to what?
To the current state of our power sector.
I think that the privatization was supposed to move the private sector forward. But at some point in the process, private interests got in the way of a proper privatization. So on the one hand, the transmission company of Nigeria was concessioned to a Canadian company, Manitoba, and we couldn't really get that concession to work, so we had to let them go. And on the other hand, the distribution companies were really sold to people in a lot of cases who don't have experience running those types of companies. And in the few cases where they brought in technical partners, those technical partners left, were only there to window dress. They left not too long after. So we had a bit of a capacity challenge there. The other challenge is that the discos committed to investing in extending the distribution networks and reducing losses. Right now, forget how much we generate and transmit, how much we lose. We lose almost 40% to aggregate technical, commercial, and collection losses. And that 40% loss, that inefficiency is factored into your tariff. So when we say we want cost-reflective tariffs, we're saying that we want tariffs that also reflect those losses, when what we ought to be advocating for is that those losses be crushed to acceptable levels less than 10%. So, and that requires investment. The discos need to invest, but they can't, many times they will argue that they can't invest if they are not getting enough money, a return on that investment. So the hope is that with new players in the market, with eligible customer regulation, you can have cases where pockets of excellence, where people can set cost-reflective tariff, and you have anchor customers that essentially pay, subsidize, the other customers because they're using the electricity for productive uses.
Before we go, according to the Central Bank of Nigeria, we spent about $14 billion annually on generators and fueling. To what extent do you think this will help if invested in the power sector?
See, ultimately, no. Ultimately, what we need is in electricity market economics, we talk about what they call the value of loss load. What the value of loss load really means is that when you don't supply power, people have to find alternatives, and that alternative in many cases in Nigeria is diesel generators, which has really, with the rising increased cost of diesel, has really gone up. So the market is ripe for distributed generators, especially people who operate solar and storage businesses, to get into the market, especially now that is a little more liberalized, and play in that space, because the alternative for the customer has become really, really expensive. And if we can figure out how to make sure that we can get that cheaper power, because we can generate using solar plus batteries at less than 10 cents. The cost of using diesel is at least 30 cents. So if we can do that on the grid, then we really save people a lot of money, and that's what this regulation can do.
Absolutely. Dr. Toby, a whole lot to talk about, but time is always not our friend.
Absolutely.
Almost thank you so much for your time on the show this morning.
You're welcome. You're welcome, Yusuf.
Yeah. So and that's the size of our show today. Join us again tomorrow for more on Business Daily. I am Yusuf Akogu.